There we
Good
are.
afternoon. Good
Hello.
morning. Good evening. Whatever time of day you're looking at this. We're back. I know, Margaret, you don't like this, Lady Poundbury, but there we are. We are back after a week of gracious rest and peace and quiet. Your whole life has been disturbed and shattered again. But hello, we're still in different rooms.
We will be for ages. I was discussing with my husband the possibility of Rev Chat merchandise that we mentioned on our last one. He thought one would we're back emblazoned across the front of the t-shirt would be good.
Excellent. Don't you think we should have a Rev Chat mug instead of, I've got a sleeping Pooh Bear today.
Oh, lovely. We could, Rev Chat mug would be good.
It'd be good. Then we could, like they do on the BBC, strategically place them on tables. Nobody ever drinks from them. They just strategically place. Match of the day are great at that.
It's quite boring. That's quite boring, really, isn't it?
But it lends itself already to the sticky. We could actually print the labels and just stick them on with sellotape.
That's all they'd expect, really. Not quality merch.
Due to lockdown pressure, because Amazon have tripled the price of most things, we'd have to make our own for the time being. Then we could sell it, yes. So, if you've got ideas, beautiful and lovely viewers, about merchandise you'd like to buy from us, please do let our IT and communications manager know, and we'll double his wages, and he can become our sales manager as well.
Well, in these lockdown times, with no collection plates at church, we've got to create income for the church.
I think eventually we should create a CD. Songs from the lockdown by the clergy. I think we could, isn't it?
I don't think we should sing. I don't think that's a good plan. We could dance.
We could dance.
No, let's not do that either. Anyway, how are you? You well?
Oh, the study tidy up is gaining pace. I've moved some things today, done a lot more vacuuming. I discovered some juggling balls, which I'd forgotten about. So I had a quick juggle earlier.
Excellent. Do you want to do that now?
No,
okay.
I can do it at a later date because I'd
say is it with 3 balls?
That's the question. Yes, it is. I can't do 4 balls.
Because Trinity Sunday's the day for 3-ball juggling.
I've done that before, and weddings.
And weddings. Oh, okay.
And weddings, very good.
Both couples and God.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing. Yeah, that's the kind of thing. So and what else have I discovered? Apart from finding 2 chairs the previous rector left here, which had been covered for such a long time, I'd forgotten about them. But they're there. They're almost ready for... But, of course, I've got to phase 2, the other side of the study now. And, of course, I'm moving things from there to here. But we've got bags of paper ready to go to the tip when we're allowed.
Excellent.
And are you all right? Did you have a good holiday?
Yeah, very nice, thank you. I had a nice holiday, actually. I stayed in Baldwin, obviously, and... no, it was good. We had a nice, relaxing time, and the weather was lovely, so it does help. You can get out for lovely walks, and it's all good.
And the school is now fully up and running again?
Yeah, school's open again. Back to beginning of term yesterday. We've done, some interesting things.
I understand you've extended the hours of school.
Yeah, the school days had to extend because I naively thought that with no distractions, my children would be, all heads down, done by lunchtime. But sadly, that's not the case. So they've got quite a lot of work to do, so they have to crack on.
It's good.
Anyway, it's all good. Thank you.
And you've been Ofsteded, of course?
Yes, terrible Ofsted.
Yeah, just catch.
They don't think much of the teaching, I have to say.
Well, there we are. You can't always have what you want, as most of our parishioners have found out.
That's very true. That's very true. So,
well, today we're going to be on the road to Emmaus, but we've had a pause, haven't we?
We better have our pause. You ready? In. I don't know why we've got there anymore.
That's okay. We do as we're told.
We do. Right, Luke. We're back in Luke's Gospel.
We are.
In fact, have we been in Luke's Gospel yet? I don't think we have. Have we?
We have. Easter.
Okay. Oh, we were Matthew and John in Easter.
Well, we were, true. Yeah.
Anyway, we're in Luke's Gospel today.
We are. Read it.
I will. Luke chapter 24, verses 13 to 35. The walk to Emmaus. Now, on the same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped he would be the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since these things took place. Moreover, some women in our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him." Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he was going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road, and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. Where are you with that then?
Well, I'm just taking stock of it all. I noticed that women had to get in on the act again. They were down at the tomb early in the morning.
They were the first witnesses.
They weren't interfering too much, but and on they go. They're there again later on.
They are.
And we're back to the tomb with them. No, it's I know it's one of your favourite stories really around this time, but I'm sure you'll explain why, particularly in light of Eucharistic ministry. But I'm just absolutely took again by the accounts that people didn't recognise who Jesus was. Whether it be in John's account of the gospel early in the morning that Mary didn't recognise him. Of course, Luke's gospel, we know it was the angels told people that he was risen. But why didn't they recognise him? And I know we've looked in our learned books to try and find an answer to this.
Yeah, but we haven't got one really, have we?
But no, they didn't have one. I just find it fascinating. Yeah, and I proffered earlier to you when we were preparing, as I say, dear viewer, we do spend hours preparing for this each week. But when we were looking at it, it was an act of Jesus doing something and saying something that showed who he was. And for me, it's part of that Jesus being revealed, a great revelation, as we heard of many other stories, whether it be Paul, I've got to get the story, Paul on the road to Damascus, or whether it be blind Bartimaeus or the eunuch on the road. As you say, lots of stories of Jesus' revelation on roads.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, it does say in here, verse 16, but their eyes were kept from recognising him. But I wonder if that's just an insert to try and help us understand. It does seem odd, doesn't it? We talked a little bit about how after my dad died a few years ago, and after he died, I kept thinking I'd see him all the time. Like in a crowd, you'd see the back of a person. You think, oh, is that Dad? And you knew it wasn't, but it was weird. Your mind plays tricks on you. But this seems to be the opposite. It's not that they're seeing Jesus everywhere because he's died and they miss him. It's that they can't see him when he's standing right in front of their faces. So,
which is why that story of Paul being blinded on the road to Damascus, to see how it was the scales fell over his eyes.
Yeah.
I don't know if it actually said he was blind, but the scales fell over his eye, blinded him or whatever.
Yeah, he was blind. Yeah.
And again, something prevented them from seeing him. I find it a fascinating part of the story.
And a couple of things that I'd forgotten about this story was that we're reminded in Luke that this is on the same day as the women go to the tomb, so
Yes,
it's later that day.
Yeah.
And also that he I can't remember what I was going to say. That's embarrassing, isn't it? Well, there we go. Definitely that they
not for me, it's not personally, no, but don't worry.
Oh, well, I can't remember what the second thing was.
It'll come back to you. Yeah, I mean, what I love about the story is there they are walking along, and we don't know. One of them is named as potentially being somebody, not being somebody as Cleopas, and the person he's working with. There are suggestions that they could have been talking, they could have been arguing, they could have been doing anything. We don't know.
Could have been his wife.
It could have been his wife.
I like the idea of it being a husband and wife team, but
yeah, I've heard that before.
Yeah,
I think Paula Gooder. I remember hearing Paula Gooder talk about that at one of the Bible conferences I went to once, and it seems a good idea. But what strikes me is how offhandish they are with this stranger they can't recognise. Yeah. Well, haven't you heard? Everyone else has heard what's been going on. I mean, he could have been drunk for all we know for 3 days, and suddenly come out of a stupor and on the road back home or whatever. You know, he's trying to find out what all the excitement and the fuss is about.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to say. That's what I was going to say. It's the first resurrection appearance in Luke's Gospel.
It is.
So and the first resurrection appearance in Luke's Gospel, and they don't recognise him.
And they don't recognise him. But that's the same in John, isn't it? The first resurrection appearance to Mary, and she didn't recognise him.
Yeah. And it just makes me think about the times when we don't recognise God at work in our lives.
Absolutely.
You know, that it's difficult, isn't it? Because I mean, often when I'm talking to kids at school about this, you know, we're talking about a story where two people went on a road and they didn't recognise it was Jesus, and then they did recognise him. And then I say something like, well, we don't recognise Jesus. And some kids say to me, but hang on, we don't walk around with Jesus. We don't in the same way, because this happened, you know, if we believe it as a literal account, and it happened some 2,000 or so years ago. So we don't walk with Jesus in the same way that they physically walked with that person and broke bread with him. But I often use that thing to describe as walking with God or walking with Jesus, the idea of God being with us in our everyday lives, in the things that we do all the time. And sometimes us not recognising that he is present in our activities and in what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, because I've told you, over Good Friday and over Easter, I reread some of the chapters of the John Pritchard book, 5 Events That Changed Christianity, or Created Christianity, or whatever. And one of the things he says about this particular thing is that it's akin in a way that until we actually, as Christians, recognise the Spirit and take it into our lives, we're blinded and don't see Jesus for ourselves.
And so the presence of God, when we talk about it in the 21st century, is the Holy Spirit, isn't it?
Yeah.
The activity and the power of God at work in our lives now.
And it doesn't mean we don't know the story. It doesn't mean we don't believe. But he would say that until we do recognise that moment of revelation, because he talks about 2 different types of being the person who's always known that there's been Jesus, they've been brought up, which I would class myself in. I never had a blinding moment, but I knew. Or the person that did have the blinding moment, but still ignored it. The real moment is when we actually recognise that spirit-filled moment in our lives, and there all is revealed, which is what happens in some of these stories I've spoken about.
And of course, we talked a bit earlier about the breaking of the bread, and the revelation part happens when Jesus takes the bread and breaks it, gives thanks, which of course was something that would happen regularly over a meal and in the Jewish tradition, breaking bread and giving thanks to God for it. But it's interesting that it's in that act that they recognise who he is. And I've often wondered, kids have said to me, you know, why? And I think, well, why? Was it the way he spoke a blessing, that it was familiar? Was it his hands lifted, and then of course they could see the marks in his hand? Or was it that the moment when God wanted him to be revealed, so that they were kept from understanding until that moment? We don't know, do we? But it's just, that's what's always stuck with me as a priest. I remember when my training incumbent was preparing me for beginning to lead the Eucharist and to be priested.
And, did he do that?
He did. He was very good at it. Hello, Simon. And I remember him saying to me, you know, you've got to work out what you think is going on as you do these things.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that really has always stuck with me was this moment of revelation. Not that I believe I'm Jesus, just in case you're confused, but I believe that when we break bread in the terms of the Eucharist, that is a point of recognition and revelation of Christ's presence with us at that moment. Yeah. And so that's always stuck with me, that when I preside at the Eucharist, I'm effectively around a table with those people, watching Christ be revealed in the breaking of the bread, and that's what happens for me at communion when we share.
Which is why, for me, one of the most central points of all of that act at the Eucharistic communion service is the moment we actually do the fraction. You know, we break this because this is God revealed, but by bringing that wafer back to, sorry, waving my hands a bit, by bringing that wafer back together again, we're recognising that we are still one body committed with each other to revealing and knowing Christ.
And I think that's something really important that this story offers us now in lockdown, when we're all separate and we're all gathered in our own houses and watching and not being able to participate in the same way, that we are still one body of Christ, that God is still with us, that we are worshipping him in different ways maybe, but in still that is worship, and God dwells with us as we pray and as we read the scriptures and as we talk and we discuss and we communicate with each other. And that when that moment, when we do return to churches and we are able to all celebrate communion again, we will be reminded that we've always been that one body, even when we were apart and when we're together. We're all joined together in that revelation and that presence of Christ.
Yeah, and I think that is crucial, because whilst we have made a decision, that's the royal we, you and me basically, almost have made a decision not to celebrate Eucharistic worship because we just can't feel it through this medium. When we are able to, the breaking of that body and recognising, as you say, that he brings us back, the lights at the end of a dark road of Emmaus, that the journey will have been complete. God has now brought us back one together to be revealed as what we are. So, lot to think about there, really.
Lots. We're still on that journey.
We're still on the journey. We are. And yeah, it's great that we're able to still continue to read these fantastic stories in Luke's Gospel or one of the other Gospels, and learn a bit more each day. I think that's the key.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. It's been lovely chatting. Thank you for watching. We'll see you again next week. We're going to pre-record next week because David's on holiday next week, but we're going to do it before he goes. So lovely to see you. Join us on our website, beaminsterteamchurches.org, on social media at Beaminster Team, and we'd love to see you. Take care. Every blessing. Bye.
All right.